You know, when we think about how a massive building collapses, our minds usually go straight to the dramatic stuff, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like an earthquake or, I don't know, a wrecking ball or
Yeah.
something.
Right. A massive explosion. It's loud. It's highly visible. Everyone points at it and says, that right there, that's why it fell.
Yeah, but, well, any structural engineer will tell you that the most dangerous, insidious threat to a building isn't usually the sudden earthquake.
Oh.
It's erosion. It's water quietly seeping into the foundation for decades.
Yeah.
It's rust silently eating away at the rebar.
Exactly. By the time the building actually falls, the real damage was done invisibly over a really long period of time.
Yeah.
Welcome to the deep dive. I'm so glad you're joining us today.
And, when you apply that exact same lens to human rights and societal collapse, the principle totally holds true.
It really does.
The slow, bureaucratic erosion of a community's rights is almost always the necessary precursor to those catastrophic front-page headlines. You rarely get the explosion without the rust first.
Which brings us to our mission for today's deep dive. We're looking at a document that tracks both the dramatic earthquakes and the silent erosion happening across the globe right now.
Right.
It's the Shia Rights Watch, or SRW, report covering human rights violations, specifically from March 1st to April 1st, 2026.
And just to warn you, this is an incredibly dense, data-heavy document.
Very dense.
So our goal today is to extract the key findings from these pages so you can really understand the current mechanics of identity-based discrimination.
But before we dive into these findings, we need to lay our cards on the table about our role today.
Yes, very important.
Because we are looking at a deeply complex global landscape. But our goal here isn't to take a side in any geopolitical, religious, or military conflict mentioned in this report.
Exactly. We are maintaining strict neutrality.
Right. We are not here to endorse any political viewpoints or military actions.
From anyone.
From anyone, yeah. Our sole objective is to impartially convey the data, the specific incidents, and the behavioral patterns exactly as they are documented by Shia Rights Watch. Think of us simply as your guides through the data they've compiled.
And to that end, it really helps to understand the methodology SRW used to build this document.
Yeah, how do they pull this together?
Well, they relied on their own network on the ground alongside public sources, but they deliberately omitted unverified claims.
Okay.
Their stated focus isn't to push like a broad political narrative, but to document factual justice and equality metrics. So if they couldn't conclusively prove an incident occurred through their verification process, it just didn't make the cut.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the fascinating thing about this report is that it doesn't open with massive battlefield maneuvers or, regional wars.
Yeah, it doesn't.
It actually starts with that structural erosion we were talking about at the top of the show. We were talking about administrative and bureaucratic suppression.
The quiet erasure of a community.
Yeah. The subtle, everyday ways a group of people is sidelined through sheer policy. It rarely makes international news, but it effectively suffocates a community's culture, their daily life, and their economic survival.
Right.
Like take Kuwait, for example. The report highlights that authorities there restricted the commemorations of Imam Ali's martyrdom.
But they didn't issue a blanket ban, did they?
No. And that's the thing. A blanket ban might cause a massive public uproar or draw international scrutiny. So instead, they restricted the commemorations to a strict 30-minute window.
Wow.
Yeah, at unified times and only in select venues.
What's fascinating here is the absolute granular control over time and space. I mean, governments and administrative bodies understand that heavy-handed, absolute bans can backfire.
Sure, they cause riots.
Exactly. But if you regulate a religious or cultural practice down to the minute, literally telling a group of people they have a government-mandated stopwatch running for their mourning period, you assert total dominance over the rhythm of that community's religious life. You shrink their footprint in the public sphere without firing a single shot.
We see that tactic of controlling the literal broadcast of an identity popping up in Afghanistan, too.
Oh, right.
Yeah, on March 21st, authorities prevented Eid prayers according to the Jafari School in Kabul and Herat. And for those unfamiliar, the Jafari School is the main school of jurisprudence within Shia Islam.
Right.
So by restricting prayers according to this specific tradition, authorities are basically forcing conformity to the state's preferred religious practices. They even confiscated loudspeakers to force everyone to adhere strictly to the official state prayer timing.
Because if you control the loudspeakers, you dictate the public soundscape.
Wow, yeah.
You're telling a minority group that their voice, their specific way of practicing their faith, is simply not allowed to exist in the open air.
But in Afghanistan, the data shows this goes far beyond just managing prayer times. A few days later, on March 25th, the report documents the forced eviction of Hazara families from their ancestral lands in Daikundi and Bamiyan.
It's devastating.
And these lands were then handed over to groups aligned with the authorities. That is a massive, permanent shift in spatial control.
It really is. It moves from merely regulating public expression to physically uprooting people from their geographical history. I mean, losing ancestral land isn't just about finding a new place to live.
Right, it's deeper than that.
It's about severing ties with generations of your family's history. And you see a similar theme of spatial restriction happening in Bahrain.
Right, the mosque incident.
Exactly. In early March, authorities surrounded the Imam al-Sadiq Mosque in Diraz to prevent unified prayer. They removed religious symbols from the area and summoned mourners, accusing them of, quote, inciting hostility.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
Treating grief or a unified prayer gathering as an act of hostility against the state is a jarring concept. But the bureaucratic suppression detailed in this report isn't just religious or geographical. It's deeply economic. Look at the data from Syria. We are talking about mass, demographic-targeted dismissals from public jobs.
The numbers on this are staggering.
Yeah. In just 1 month, 113 doctors were fired in Latakia.
113.
246 teachers were dismissed in Tartus, and 405 public employees were fired from the Directorate of Education in Homs.
When you look at those numbers, you have to think about the cascading effect on the community.
Yeah.
Firing over 100 doctors or hundreds of teachers from a specific demographic isn't just about taking away their individual paychecks. You're actively degrading the healthcare and the education systems that an entire community relies on.
It's like 1,000 paper cuts. It's restricting the blood flow to a limb. You aren't violently cutting the arm off, which would draw immediate attention, right?
Right.
But by quietly removing the doctors, the teachers, the professionals, the literal lifeblood of a functioning society, you ensure the limb withers and dies entirely on its own.
You strip them of their professional class, their stability, and their means to thrive. It's structural suffocation. And history shows us, tragically, that when this administrative suppression becomes normalized, the structure eventually gives way.
The policy morphs into physical brutality.
Yes.
And this localized neighborhood-level suppression eventually hits a tipping point where the bureaucracy ends, overt destruction begins.
Yeah.
Let's look at the data from India. On March 28th, during a religious procession in Murshidabad, there was a major outbreak of identity-based violence. The report implicates groups linked to Hindutva ideology.
And just briefly, that's a political ideology advocating for Hindu nationalism and the marginalization of minority identities in India.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And during this one event, 40 shops were completely destroyed and multiple people were injured.
40 shops.
Just imagine your own neighborhood for a second. Think about your main street. If 40 local businesses were wiped out overnight, based purely on the identity of the owners, the economic devastation to that town would take decades to repair.
The transition from bureaucratic pressure to overt physical destruction is always jarring. The erosion has successfully paved the way for the earthquake.
And the human cost escalates rapidly from there. In Pakistan, armed groups blocked key routes in the Karam region, actively ambushing Shia convoys traveling between Parakunar and Peshawar, which resulted in civilian casualties.
Awful.
The report also highlights what happened when protests broke out in Karachi and Islamabad regarding the broader war involving Iran. The response turned fatal.
It did.
Security forces killed between 10 to 16 protesters near the U.S. consulate in Karachi and 3 more near the embassy in Islamabad.
You know, the threshold for using lethal force against a marginalized group drops significantly once that group has already been administratively dehumanized.
That makes sense, yeah.
If the state already treats a community's existence as a bureaucratic nuisance or a threat, pulling the trigger during a protest becomes a much smaller leap for security forces.
And we see that threshold essentially vanishing in Bahrain as well. Beyond the mosque restrictions we covered earlier, March saw a sweeping mass arrest campaign. Over 200 people were detained.
Just swept up.
Yeah, and the charges ranged from treason and espionage to simply using social media to express solidarity. And tragically, the report documents the death of a detainee, Mohammed al-Musawi.
Under horrific circumstances.
According to the data, he died following severe physical and psychological torture while in detention.
200 people disappearing into a system where fatal torture is documented. I mean, the escalation from simply restricting prayer times to state-sanctioned violence resulting in death, it's a terrifying trajectory.
Honestly, though, the most overwhelming section of this report regarding overt violence is Syria. The sheer volume of incidents is difficult to process. It's a relentless daily log of abductions, killings, and public executions. You have 18-year-old Lana al-Suleiman, abducted from Masyaf. 14-year-old Alma Eliasaleh, taken in Latakia.
14 years old.
Yeah. Returning families from Lebanon are being detained, interrogated, and subjected to identity-based harassment at the border crossings. The report even details public executions, like Hussein al-Raho in Damascus, whose body was discarded in public to send a message.
It paints a picture of a climate of absolute impunity. The actors committing these acts operate under the assumption that there will be zero consequences for their brutality.
I have to pause here, though, and ask you to explain a specific element of the Syria data that genuinely confused me.
Sure.
Because alongside all these horrible human casualties, the abductions, the executions, the report details a massive coordinated campaign against heritage sites.
Ah, the shrines and the cemeteries.
Yes. The shrine of Sheikh Ahmad al-Bilani was vandalized.
Yeah.
The shrine of al-Qidr Abu al-Bas was vandalized. The shrine of Sheikh Muhammad al-Maghribi was entirely destroyed and burned to the ground.
Yeah.
The shrines of Bani Hashem and Qardaha were confiscated and actually converted into military facilities. And they desecrated the Al-Firda cemetery in Homs, intentionally damaging the graves.
Right.
So, here is my question. Why target the cemeteries and shrines? If an armed group or a government is already seizing power, if they're already taking the land and firing the doctors and teachers, what is the strategic value in spending resources to attack the dead?
That was a profoundly important question. I mean, on the surface, it seems completely illogical to waste military or paramilitary resources breaking tombstones or burning an empty shrine.
Exactly.
But it makes perfect sense when you understand the underlying psychology of cultural erasure.
Okay, how so?
When an aggressor wants to completely eliminate a group of people from a region, killing them or violently displacing them achieves the immediate goal. But to ensure that displacement is permanent, you have to erase the proof that they were ever there to begin with.
Wait, if they are already gone, who are you trying to prove it to?
To the displaced community and to history itself. A shrine or a cemetery is a physical, undeniable anchor to the land. It is a monument that says, our grandfathers are buried here. Our history, our faith, and our cultural identity are inextricably tied to this specific soil.
Wow.
So if you destroy the shrines and desecrate the graves, you are severing that community's historical roots to the geography. You make their forced displacement feel permanent and absolute. You aren't just removing the current living generation, you are retroactively evicting their ancestors.
You're telling them you have no claim to this place anymore, not even in memory.
Exactly that. Turning a holy shrine into a military facility, as the report documented in Qardaha, is the ultimate display of absolute conquest over both the physical space and the cultural memory of a people.
That is incredibly dark, but it makes horrifying strategic sense. It's the ultimate form of eviction.
But, you know, this localized neighborhood-level violence becomes a completely different beast when a full-scale regional war breaks out.
Right.
Because what this report ultimately highlights is a broader systemic catastrophe. What happens when these deeply ingrained identity-based vulnerabilities intersect with the sheer chaos of a regional conflict?
The dedicated section of the report on the civilian toll in the Middle East brings this into sharp focus.
It's grim.
Let's be clear, we are talking about staggering numbers here, framed directly against the protections outlined under the Geneva Conventions, which are the foundational international laws designed to protect civilians in armed conflict.
Right.
In Iran, the preliminary data shows between 1,444 and over 1,900 civilian deaths.
Thousands of lives.
Up to 20,000 injuries. And the International Organization for Migration reports that 82,000 civilian buildings were damaged across 20 provinces.
Unbelievable.
That kind of infrastructure destruction affects 180,000 civilians. Try to picture 82,000 buildings. That is the erasure of entire communities, neighborhoods, and lifelines.
The scale of the destruction makes survival practically impossible, even for those who escape the direct violence. And the situation documented in Lebanon is similarly devastating.
Over 1,268 deaths as of March 31st, and 3,750 injuries. But what really stands out in this section is how Human Rights Watch, confirmed forced evacuation orders that displace 15% of the entire population.
15%.
Yeah, specifically targeting predominantly Shia-populated areas.
Hmm.
There are strict restrictions preventing them from returning to the areas south of the Litani River.
Right.
On top of that, the report notes verified instances of prohibited weapons, specifically white phosphorus, being used in civilian areas like Farkella and Mays al-Jabal.
Which is, I mean, it's horrific.
For context, white phosphorus is a chemical substance used in artillery that ignites when exposed to oxygen. It burns at incredibly high temperatures, can burn right to the bone, and cannot simply be put out with water. Using it in densely populated civilian areas is a massive red line in international law.
Absolutely.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. When you place these massive war statistics next to the localized identity-based violence we just talked about, war provides the ultimate cover.
Yes, it does.
In the fog of war, identity-based persecution and forced displacement can easily be disguised as standard, unavoidable military operations.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the exact mechanism by which international humanitarian law completely collapses.
How so?
Well, the Geneva Conventions are built on the core premise of distinction, the idea that armies must continually distinguish between combatants and civilians.
Right, that's fundamental.
But when warring factions view an entire demographic, an entire religious identity, as inherently suspect or intrinsically linked to an enemy force, that critical distinction vanishes entirely.
So the civilian is simply no longer seen as a civilian.
Precisely. A forced evacuation order might be officially framed as a military necessity to clear a battle zone, but if it permanently alters the demographic makeup of a region, and those people are never allowed to return to their homes, it ceases to be a safety measure.
It becomes a tool of displacement.
Exactly, identity-based displacement. When a weapon like white phosphorus is deployed in civilian zones, it's not just a breach of weapons protocols. It's a terrifying signal that the rules of civilian protection simply do not apply to certain groups of people. The chaos and the literal fog of war are utilized to obscure targeted, systemic eradication.
So what does this all mean? We've traced a path from strict 30-minute prayer limits in Kuwait all the way to the deployment of white phosphorus in civilian zones in Lebanon.
It's a huge spectrum.
It feels like whiplash to cover that much ground. But this SRW report serves as a stark, necessary reminder of the absolute fragility of human rights, specifically Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the freedom of religion and belief.
It demonstrates in brutal documented detail that the slide from a bureaucratic inconvenience to an existential threat happens much faster than we think.
It really shows how administrative paper cuts, firing doctors, confiscating loudspeakers, tweaking zoning laws, eventually lead to the destruction of entire neighborhoods and the desecration of cemeteries.
Yeah.
The data is grim, yes, but understanding the mechanics of how this happens is the only way to recognize the patterns before they escalate out of control.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder, something that extends beyond the specific numbers and dates we've covered today.
Sure.
We live in an era of unprecedented information access. I mean, you can pull up the news on your phone right now and see a dozen global tragedies unfolding in real time. It's a constant, relentless flood of data.
It's exhausting. We are all swimming in it every day.
We are, but here's the critical question. Does the sheer volume of global news, this constant connectivity, actually protect human rights, or does it hinder them?
Oh, wow.
Are bad actors, governments, armed factions, extremists relying on the world's information overload to commit these identity-based targeted attacks in plain sight?
Because they know we're too busy.
Do they operate with the knowledge that the global public is simply too distracted? Too overwhelmed by a million other headlines to intervene or even notice what they're doing on a granular level?
That's a haunting thought. The idea that our constant connection to everything is actually providing a smokescreen for the worst thing.
Yeah.
It brings us right back to the beginning of our conversation. We are all so busy looking out for the massive earthquakes on our news feeds, the sudden loud explosions, that we completely ignore the quiet, deliberate erosion happening right under our feet until the building is already collapsed.
By the time the dust finally settles, it's too late to save the foundation.
Definitely something to keep in mind the next time you scroll through the daily headlines. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Take care of yourselves, and we'll catch you next time.